Orchestrated entirely new Canadian story with fresh characters, settings, and emotional beats while preserving proven narrative formula. Orchestrated entirely new Canadian story with fresh characters, settings, and emotional beats while preserving proven narrative formula. At the cool edge of the Carringtons' ballroom, where the gold light from the chandeliers gave way to the dim mouth of the coat alcove, a woman sat in a wheelchair and waited for an evening she had spent 4 months planning to begin without her in it. She had positioned herself there on purpose, the way she always did, 15 minutes before she was needed. Near the coats, out of the current. A vantage point that let her watch a room decide what it thought of itself. A couple drifted past her, deep in a conversation about a cottage on the South Shore, and neither of them looked down. A moment later, a man in a charcoal tuxedo paused, peeled off his overcoat without breaking stride, and laid it across her lap as though setting it on a shelf. "Just the one, thanks," he said, and was gone before she could decide whether to laugh. A woman with pearls the size of cranberries leaned in and asked kindly where the washrooms were, and then a younger man set a half-finished rye and ginger on her armrest, the ice already going to water, and turned back to the floor. She lifted the coat off her knees and folded it over the chair beside her. She moved the glass to the little table by the dessert display. Her face did not change. After 6 years, she had a face for this. That was when the side door near the kitchen opened and let in a draft of harbor air and a man in a canvas work jacket carrying something wrapped in moving blankets. A boy came in behind him, maybe 8, and a clip-on tie gone slightly crooked, holding the man's sleeve. The man handed the wrapped thing off to a woman with a clipboard, said a few words, and then he turned and saw the whole of it at once: the coat, the watered drink, the woman holding still in the place where the light ran out. He crossed the floor without hurrying. He didn't say, "Can I help you?" He pulled out a chair at the nearest empty table, the legs scraping the parquet, and tipped his head toward the dessert table. "There's a butter tart over there. My son's been threatening since we parked the truck," he said. "He's going to need a witness. Come sit with us." She looked at him long enough to be sure he wasn't being gentle with her because of the chair. He wasn't looking at the chair at all. She rolled forward. "Before the rest of this finds its shape, take a moment to follow along and tell us in the comments which corner of the country or the world you're watching from tonight." 2 weeks earlier, on a gray Tuesday in late October, a man named Holden Beckett was bent over a workbench in a low cinderblock shop off Pleasant Street in Dartmouth, on the wrong side of the harbor from the money. Sawdust hung in the slant of afternoon light coming through the one high window. 3 folders lay open in front of him. The top one was labeled Beckett Adaptive, RFB, Carrington Hotel Heritage Renovation, and the submission was due in 9 days. He'd walked the Carrington's lobby and mezzanine the week before, pretending to be a man waiting for someone, and had sketched every place the building quietly refused people onto a paper map he kept folded in his jacket. Now he was turning those pencil marks into something clean. Door widths, threshold heights. The sight lines of a person looking at the world from a meter off the floor. In the corner, near the little space heater they ran on cold mornings, his 8-year-old Finn was building a marble run out of cardboard tube and hot glue. He'd been at it 90 minutes and had said perhaps 6 sentences. "Dad," he said, "does the marble go faster if the first drop's taller, or if there's more drops?" Holden didn't look up. "Taller first drop gets you speed, more drops gets you time. You have to decide what you're trying to make the marble feel." Finn took this in with the gravity of a man receiving the combination to a safe, and went back to his glue. Under the bench, an old shepherd mix named Moose, 13 and mostly retired from caring about anything, let out a long breath and resettled his chin on Holden's boot. Above the workbench, half hidden behind a row of clamps, a framed certificate had been turned to face the wall for so long that the dust had drawn a clean rectangle around it. Beside it, on the shelf, sat a stack of engineering journals still sealed in their mailing plastic, subscriptions Holden had never canceled and never opened, going on 4 years now. His phone buzzed against the wood. IWK Foundation, Gala office. He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Beckett. Mr. Beckett. It's Colleen from the Gala team." The adaptive seat you built for the Doucette boy. We'd love to feature it Friday night in the donor showcase. It would mean the world if you brought it by yourself. We've got a place at the family table, and one for your son. Holden pressed his thumb between his eyebrows. I'm not really a tuxedo guy, Colleen. The Doucettes are going to be there. He looked at Finn, who had finished a perfect parabola of cardboard and was clearly waiting for an audience. Then his eyes went to the folder that said Carrington on the table. The gala was being held at the Carrington, the same building he meant to bid on. He could walk those public rooms in a rented suit, and nobody would ask him a single question about why. All right, he said. We'll be there. Friday came in low and overcast, the harbor the color of old nickel. In the bathroom mirror, Finn fought a clip-on tie that didn't need fighting while Holden knotted a real one over him anyway, his hands moving through a sequence they remembered from his own wedding. On his left hand, the worn band caught the light over the sink. He had never once taken it off. They drove over the McDonald Bridge with the cables ticking past the truck window. Dartmouth behind them, the city lifting up its hill ahead. When the Carrington stone face came into view on Lower Water Street, Holden slowed without meaning to. His eyes ran the front steps, the brass-railed entrance, the narrow service door tucked around the side. He counted 3 places where the building had hidden its accessible route so politely that it had stopped being a route at all. He said nothing. Beside him, Finn practiced his company smile. That same Friday morning, across the harbor and 40 floors up in the Whitcomb Tower on Hollis Street, Nora Whitcomb had been at her desk since 7. Her chief of staff, Imogen Clark, came in with 2 coffees and a printed run sheet and set them down side by side. Cocktails at 6:30, Imogen said. Your remarks at 7:45, dinner at 8. If you wanted, you could read the speech and be in the car by 9. Nora looked at her. I'm the host. I don't sneak out of my own building. Imogen didn't argue. She'd been chief of staff for 10 months and had already learned the difference between the things Nora let go and the things she would never, ever let go. For half a second, while Imogen scanned the donor seating chart, Nora wasn't in the tower at all. She was on Highway 102 in the second week of a February 6 years and 4 months gone, the wipers losing to the snow, the back end of the car stepping out on black ice near Elmsdale, the guardrail coming up slow and then not slow at all. Then she was looking at the perforated ceiling tiles of a recovery room at the QEII, counting the little holes, learning a new arithmetic about her own body. Then she was back at the desk, and Imogen was asking whether she wanted the navy suit or the gray. Navy, she said. She had been chief executive of Whitcomb Hospitality for 14 months and chair of the family's foundation for longer than that. Galas were still the hardest rooms, not because of the chair, but because of the particular way a certain kind of crowd looked straight through her, as if a woman seated at their own eye level were a small renovation they hadn't approved. So she had developed a habit. 15 minutes before she was due to speak, she would slip away from the donors and roll to a quiet seam at the edge of the room, usually near the coats, where the light was low and people on their way to somewhere assumed she was the help. She called it reading the room. She knew it was also hiding in the one place no one thought to look. That night, she did exactly that. And in the 12 minutes she spent at the edge of the Carrington's ballroom, 3 strangers took her for staff. The coat, the washrooms, the watered drink. And then the side door opened, and the man in the work jacket walked in. For 10 minutes they sat. Finn asked her about the camber on her rear wheels with the focus of a boy asking about a Mars rover, and she answered him as though he were a junior engineer she was thinking of hiring. Holden didn't ask what she did for a living. He asked which fiddle tune the trio in the corner had butchered least. And when she named one, he admitted he'd never had an opinion about a fiddle tune in his life, and asked her to give him one to borrow. At 7:45, the lights came down. The MC stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host this evening, the Chief Executive Officer of Whitcomb Hospitality Group, Miss Nora Whitcomb. The room turned. Heads found their tables. Nora set down her napkin. Excuse me, gentlemen, she said, and rolled toward the stage. Holden didn't move. Finn, his mouth full of tart, looked up. Daddy, was that her? Holden didn't answer. He was watching the chair pull away from their table. and his eyes had caught the small machined mark on the lower frame, just below the seat pan. A stamped wave, an anchor, 2 letters. He knew that mark. He had drawn that mark. He had drawn that mark. He'd be. Saturday morning came too early. Holden was in the shop by 5:30, before Finn was up, before Moose had so much as opened an eye on the rug. He stood at the bench and reached up and turned the framed certificate around for the first time in 4 years. Dalhousie University, Department of Biomedical Engineering. The Whitcomb Foundation Fellowship in Adaptive Design. Awarded to Holden M. Beckett, 2011. He set it glass up on the wood. Then he opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, the one he hadn't touched since the spring he'd cleared out of the apartment in the city. Hardbound notebooks. Sketchpads gone soft at the corners. A clipped stack of patent filings. The top one read, Adaptive Pressure Relief Seating System. Tidewater Contour. Inventor, H. Beckett. He sat with a folder on his lap for a long while, and the pieces came back out of order. Mara on the back step of the little house in Bedford the summer before everything, telling him, with the diagnosis still folded in her cardigan pocket, just promise me you'll keep building things, Holdy. The lab at Tidewater Mobility a year later, the first frame on the test rig, the team passing him a marker so he could sign the clean drawing. Mara in the third version of the seat, laughing because for the first time in 2 years she could sit through a whole supper without the ache that came from a chair that treated her like a problem to be stored. Mara, smaller, in a curtained room at the hospital, testing the cushion pressures herself even when her hands could only half close, because she wanted the numbers honest and would not let him soften the readings out of love. This is the only thing in the house that doesn't pretend nothing's changed, she told him once. And then the meeting. The spring after she was gone, with a lawyer who explained very gently that under the work-for-hire language Holden had signed in 2012, the company owned the design outright and was under no obligation to keep his name on anything it sold. He'd signed the papers. He'd taken his wedding ring off the bench where he'd set it that morning, slid it back on, and never taken it off since. Daddy. Finn was in the doorway in his socks, dragging his blanket, his hair standing up on one side. Why are you up so early? Just looking at some old work, Peanut. Was it good work? Holden closed the folder. It was honest work. That afternoon a courier left a small envelope at the shop. Cream paper, a handwritten address. To Master Finn Beckett. C/O Beckett Adaptive. Inside, a card in a steady slanting hand. Dear Finn, thank you for explaining wheel camber to me on Friday. I learned more in 10 minutes than I did in my last engineering review. I've sent along a book I think you'll like. Tell your father the butter tart was the smartest decision I made all night. N. Whitcomb. Beneath the card, a hardcover for kids about how machines move, the kind of thing a person buys in an actual bookshop on a Saturday. Holden read the card twice. Then he walked back to the bench, slid the Tidewater folder into the drawer, and left his bid exactly as it was. He didn't add a line about Dalhousie, or Tidewater, or who had built the seat she was sitting in. He let the proposal stand on its own. 3 weeks after the gala, on a wet morning in November, Imogen Clark set 3 thin folders on Nora's desk. Final 3 for the site walkthroughs, she said. 2 you'd expect. And a small outfit out of Dartmouth, Beckett Adaptive. You won't have heard of them. 2 people, including the principal. But the references are strange in a good way. I called 2 former clients on Friday. Both spinal cord injuries. Both told me, almost word for word, the same thing. That he didn't grab the chair, didn't open the door before they got to it, and asked the questions nobody else thinks to ask. Nora picked up the folder, schedule him last. The Beckett walkthrough was set for the following Wednesday at 10. At 5:02, Nora rolled into the Carringtons' lobby and saw, standing near the front desk in a clean work jacket, the man from the gala. He looked up. He didn't look surprised, exactly. He looked like a man who had spent a few days getting ready for a door to open. Mr. Beckett. Ms. Whitcomb. They shook hands. 20 feet back, Imogen let out a breath so quietly nobody heard it. The walkthrough ran 90 minutes. Nora rolled, Holden walked. He didn't push. He didn't reach for a door before she got to it. He didn't offer to take her notes. 3 separate times he asked her exactly where she felt the pinch points she'd long since trained herself to absorb without complaint, and every time she answered, he made a mark on his paper map. They disagreed, briefly, about the service lift. He proposed shifting it 2.5 meters south. She thought it should stay and the corridor be rebuilt around it. She was right. He saw it on the second look and said so, without apologizing for missing it the first time. They were standing in the second-floor West Hall when a man appeared at the far end with another, younger man, a half-step behind. Roland Hesketh was 64, silver, expensive in the way of a man who'd never once been interesting. He crossed the corridor in long strides. "Nora." He looked at Holden the way you look at a delivery. "This must be your renovator, Roland Hesketh. I sit on the board. I keep telling Nora this whole project is a very dear way to make a personal statement. I'm sure you can do it for rather less than she thinks." Holden shook his hand once. "The bid's the bid." Hesketh smiled the smile of a man who hasn't been agreed with. "We'll see. I'm bringing in Northgate on Friday for a comparison number. You'll like the savings, Nora." He moved off. The younger man followed, but as he turned, his eyes caught Holden's for half a second. Holden knew the face. He trained him on a seating and positioning team 4 years ago and had liked him then. Trevor Nash didn't nod. He kept walking. When the hall was empty, Nora said, "Most people in your position would have agreed with him to keep the contract." "Most people in my position," Holden said, "don't have to shave in the morning." She rolled off first so he wouldn't see the start of the smile. 5 weeks after the gala, on a Thursday night, Nora was the last person on the 42nd floor. The cleaners had gone. The donor wing was dark. She had a single lamp on and the Beckett proposal open in front of her. The bid was tight. The numbers were honest. The schedule was conservative to a fault. None of that was what had kept her in the building at 10 o'clock. It was the first sentence. "Access is not a favor a building grants. It is the building finally admitting who it was always for." She had read that sentence before. She knew she had. She did not know where. She opened her laptop and logged into the Whitcomb Foundation archive, the family fund her grandfather had started after the war, the one she now chaired alongside the company. She searched the academic grants ledger for 2011. Whitcomb Foundation Fellowship in Adaptive Design, recipient. Redacted under settlement, 2021. She frowned at the screen. Redactions in the family ledger were rare and usually meant a legal mess that had outlived everyone who'd cared about it. She switched to the research database she'd paid for during her recovery year and searched the fellowship by year and field. She found a dissertation. The author was listed by initials only. The first line of the abstract read, "Access is not a favor, a building grants." She closed the laptop. She didn't search any further. She had decided, in the time it took the screen to fold down, that she wanted to hear the rest of it from him. She rolled to the window. The bridge made its long curve of light against the dark. She'd read that abstract once, at 25, when a boy from her residence at Queens used a chair, and she'd gone looking for someone who wrote about disability, the way her father wrote about buildings, as a thing to design beautifully, not to apologize around. She'd found the sentence and kept it and lost the name. She had been moving through the world, she realized, on the work of a stranger for a very long time. Her father, at his desk in the house on Young Avenue, had once told her how he chose which fellowships to fund. "I pick the ones who will never come asking," he'd said. That same night, across the harbor in Eastern Passage, Finn sat at the kitchen table with a half-built robot and a fistful of parts. "Dad." "Yeah, Peanut? Do you think she's sad?" Holden set down the dish towel. He thought about it for a real minute. "No, I don't think she's sad. I think she's careful, like your mom was." Mum was sad sometimes. Mum was sad sometimes, but mostly she was careful. Finn turned this over and snapped a small motor onto his robot. "I think Nora's careful too," he said. Holden ran the water and didn't turn around right away. He wasn't sure his face was ready. Out in the shop later, with the proposal printout in front of him and Mara's photograph on the shelf, he understood that he hadn't put the certificate back face down. It was still glass up on the bench. He let it stay. 8 weeks after the gala, in the second week of January, the Whitcomb Hospitality Board met on the 45th floor at 10 in the morning. 11 members at the long table. Hesketh sat 3 seats from the head. Nora sat at the head. Imogen sat against the wall behind her with a leather folder she'd been building for 10 days. Hesketh opened. I want to thank Nora for her work through a hard 14 months. And because I think we owe each other plain speech, I want to be honest. I've had concerns about the Carrington renovation for a year, and a financial review has confirmed them. As of last Tuesday, I and 3 other minority shareholders, holding 15.5% of the equity, have signed a joint motion of no confidence in the current chief executive. I'm also tabling an alternative for the renovation. Northgate build, 22% under. Same scope. I'd ask the board to weigh both in light of the motion. The room didn't move. Nora folded her hands. Before we vote, I'd like to walk the board through the current contract once more. The principal designer is downstairs. I've asked him up. The board traded looks. Imogen left and came back a minute later with Holden, who carried a single binder and wore his good jacket again. He looked, in the mirror behind the head of the table, exactly like the small-town contractor Hesketh wanted him to look like. He spoke for 4 minutes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't introduce himself past his name. He joked about the load-bearing limits on the second-floor west corridor, about the real cost of moving a lift versus rebuilding around one, about an occupancy gain across 2 markets the Carrington had never once been able to serve. The numbers weren't flashy. They were correct. When he finished, Hesketh smiled. Mr. Beckett, I appreciate it. I'm sure you're a perfectly good small contractor. But we have a comparison number that's meaningfully cheaper. Anything to add? Holden opened his mouth. A chair scraped back at the far end of the table. Gideon Maddox stood. He was 57, a senior vice president at Tidewater Mobility, an industry advisor Nora had brought onto the board 6 months earlier for exactly the sort of question no one had expected him to answer today. He'd been quiet the whole meeting. Before this board votes, he said, the members should know something Tidewater's general counsel confirmed to me at 9:15 this morning. The Northgate proposal relies on 3 pressure distribution principles protected under patents in the Tidewater Contour series, filed under the inventor initials HB between 2014 and 2017. Tidewater has not licensed those principles to Northgate. I'd asked Mr. Trask Beckett to confirm whether he is, in fact, the HB on those patents. The room was very still. Yes, Holden said. I am. Hesketh's face didn't move, and then it did. The color left it in a way no one at that table could pretend not to see. Maddox slid a folder down the long surface toward the chair of the board. That's the infringement documentation, he said. A no-confidence motion can't proceed on the strength of a comparison bid that'll be in litigation inside a week. The motion was withdrawn in under 10 minutes. Hesketh was the first one out of the room. The boardroom emptied slowly. Imogen closed her folder, lingered by the wall, and slipped out behind the last of them. The big door clicked. The light hummed. Nora and Holden were the only 2 left at the long table. Nora didn't say thank you. She said, you sat at my table that night, mine. For a while, neither of them spoke. The winter light came flat through the west windows and turned the room the color of old paper. How long? She finally asked. Have you known I was sitting in your seat? Since the gala. You didn't say. Didn't feel like mine to say. She looked down at the lower frame of her own chair, at the brushed metal where the small wave was hidden under her elbow. My father had it made, she said, through Tidewater. After the crash. He never told me who designed it. I think he didn't want me feeling I owed anyone anything. Holden nodded slowly. Your family's foundation funded my fellowship, 2011, Dalhousie. I know. I found the redaction last week. I knew the sentence before I knew the name. She paused. Tell me about her. So he told her about Mara, the spinal tumor. The way she'd ordered him to keep building things. The seat he'd made first for her and then a better one, and then a better one again, by which point she was too tired to use it long. How she'd tested the cushion pressures with hands that could only half close, because she would not have him grate her grip out of pity. The chair was the only thing in the house that didn't pretend nothing had changed. That was the line she'd left him with. Nora didn't look away. I'm sorry. So am I. For the road. I've mostly stopped being sorry for it. I've mostly stopped, too, she said. He moved his hand a little across the table, not to take hers, just to set it down where it could be reached. She didn't move hers away. For the second time in 2 months, they sat together without saying anything. When Nora finally rolled out into the corridor, Finn was on a bench by the elevators beside Imogen, swinging his feet and working through a peppermint from the reception desk. Imogen had a coffee in one hand and a tissue in the other she hadn't used yet. Hi, Nora, Finn said. Do you want to come over for spaghetti sometime? Imogen looked very hard at her coffee. That's a serious invitation, Nora said. My dad makes really good spaghetti. He puts a tiny bit of maple syrup in it, which sounds weird, but it's good. That does sound weird, Nora said, and good. Down by the elevator bank, Gideon Maddox waited with a top coat over his arm. Holden came out of the boardroom, and they met without quite shaking hands. Should have called you years ago, Maddox said. I wouldn't have answered. I know. The doors opened. Maddox stepped on alone, gave one short nod and let them close. 3 months later, the Carrington was a construction site. The second-floor west corridor was open to the studs. The lift stayed where it was, but its shaft had been reframed for a wider car. The lobby was a maze of plywood and signs that said, "Watch your step." Nora had developed a new habit. Every Thursday after the trades went home, she came by in jeans and a denim jacket with a double-double from the Tims across the street. Not as the chief executive, just as Nora. Imogen didn't come. Holden met her at the side door each week. Finn came when school had nothing better to ask of him. He'd been issued his own hard hat and tape measure, and had learned to call out a reading off the laser level under supervision. In return, he'd taught Nora how to fold a paper boat that would actually float in the cold puddle at the bottom of the lift pit. The Hesketh suit sat on a desk somewhere. It would be tossed out in May. Roland had filed it. The company's lawyers had filed back. The local paper had tried twice to turn the thing into a romance. Both Nora and Holden had declined to comment in language so flat that the third attempt never came. One Thursday, the rain came down hard around 6. Finn, in his hard hat, looked up at Nora. You should come over for spaghetti. Nora glanced at Holden. He means it literally, Holden said. He's been waiting for the right rain. 3 days earlier, Holden had built a low cedar ramp at his front steps. He hadn't mentioned it to her. He hadn't mentioned it to anyone. She rolled up it easily. They had pancakes for supper, Finn's call, and Holden did in fact work a small pour of maple into the batter. Nora tasted it, raised one eyebrow, and ate 3. Halfway through his second, Finn fell asleep with his cheek on his forearm. Holden got up without a word, came back from the couch with a wool blanket and laid it over the boy's shoulders without lifting his head. Nora watched him do it with the same careful attention she'd brought to the Foundation archive the night she'd decided to wait. I've never had pancakes for supper, she said. That's because nobody ever just left the porch light on for you. He heard himself say it. He didn't look away. She didn't either. The rain went on, and Moose made his slow circle and lay down across Finn's feet under the table. When Nora left an hour later, she didn't stay the night. She didn't need to. She put one hand on Finn's shoulder where his head rested on his arm, and she put the other, just for a second, on the inside of Holden's wrist where the pulse was. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. She rolled back down the cedar ramp into the wet street, and the porch light caught the rain on the spokes of her wheels. After she'd gone, Holden carried Finn to bed without waking him and sat a long while on the edge of the mattress, watching him breathe. Then he went out to the shop and turned the Dalhousie certificate around so that, for the first time in 4 years, it faced the room. 1 year after the gala, on a clear evening in October that smelled of harbor salt and cold leaves, the renovated Carrington opened to the public. The press preview filled the new ballroom with 200 guests, several of them donors from the previous year's children's gala who were doing their level best to pretend they had no memory of a woman in a wheelchair near the dessert table. Nora gave the opening remarks from a low stage built at her height. She thanked the trades, the design partners, the architects of record, the long-serving staff who'd stayed through 15 months of plywood. She did not thank her board. Then she said something that hadn't been printed in the program. "There's one person I'd like up here tonight who is listed in the credits as our lead accessibility designer. He'd have preferred to stay in the credits. I'm asking him up anyway. Mr. Beckett." Near the back, Holden stood between Finn and Imogen and didn't move. Finn, who had been waiting his whole life for this moment without knowing it, put two small hands flat on the small of his father's back and pushed. Holden walked up. He stepped onto the low stage. He stood beside her and looked at the microphone for a long second. "A room is only worth as much as the people it lets through the door," he said. "Tonight, for the first time, this one tells the truth." He stepped back. The room rose. The applause took its time finding the end of itself, coming up first from the front tables, hesitating, returning stronger from the back, finally settling into the steady kind that means a room has decided what it's clapping for. Holden kept his eyes on one point on the far wall the entire time. At a table near the back, Roland Hesketh sat beside a woman who hadn't asked who he was. He'd been invited as a courtesy. He was still a shareholder. He stood, finished his water, set the glass down on the white linen, and walked out without making a scene, which was, in its quiet way, the most grown-up thing he'd done in 18 months. Nora stayed on the stage. She put out her hand. Holden took it. She didn't let go through the rest of the ovation. Didn't let go when the trio came back to the corner of the room. Didn't let go for the better part of 2 minutes. Against the wall, Imogen turned slightly, pretended to study the seating chart, and pressed the heel of her hand to the corner of her eye. Finn, having finished a second square of cake, climbed onto a chair so he could see, a violation of at least 3 house rules that at this point neither parent in the room could be bothered to enforce. Outside, the lights came on along the waterfront one by one, and the bridge glowed slow against the dark water. And a building that had spent 112 years quietly refusing half the people who might have walked into it was now, at last, a place anyone could walk into, or roll into, and be expected. In April, 6 months after the reopening, on a Sunday when the air off the harbor still held the last of the winter and the first of the spring, 3 people went out along the boardwalk at Point Pleasant. Finn was in front, taller by a full inch, chasing a flock of gulls that had no intention of being caught, and were, in the way of Halifax gulls, extremely patient about it. Behind him, Nora rolled along the smooth boards. Holden walked at her left, close enough to be near, far enough not to crowd. It was the same chair she'd used the night of the gala. She'd been offered a new one twice and turned it down both times. "Tidewater called yesterday," Holden said. "They're filing the corrected inventor record next week. The whole Contour series, quietly." "Good," Nora said, and Dalhousie posted the endowment on Friday. The Mara Beckett Fund for Adaptive Design. He had to clear his throat once before he could say the name. Nora reached over and laid her hand on his cuff. "I wanted her name first," she said. "I know, thank you." They went on a while without talking. A couple in their 70s passed the other way, and the woman in that pair smiled at Nora the way one wheelchair user smiles at another. A small private nod that the rest of the world strolls right past without ever seeing. Then Finn came galloping back from a piling with a small spiral shell cupped in both hands. "Nora, look." He set it carefully in her lap, the way a man hands over a drawing he's proud of. She turned the shell in her fingers and closed her hand around it and stopped the chair. Holden stopped beside her and bent down. Not because she needed him to, but because somewhere in the last year and a half it had become the way they spoke to each other when something mattered, his face level with hers. "I never asked to be invited to anyone's table," she said. "Neither of us was looking for one." She looked at him. "I'm still not asking. I'm just staying. I'm here." Some mornings, Nora still woke in the recovery year, the late light on the wrong side of the window, and had to walk herself back through the calendar to the present day. The walk back had gotten shorter. The room she was walking back to had a warmer light in it now. The harbor went orange behind the masts of the moored boats. 12 feet ahead, Finn had found a second shell and was waiting for permission to bring it over. And somewhere up the hill, a church bell rang the half-hour. Nora slipped the first shell into her jacket pocket. Holden straightened, the boy ahead, the man at her left, the woman in the chair her late father had ordered without ever telling her who built it. They went on together along the water. None of them, in the end, the one who had done the inviting, and none of them the one who had been waiting. Only 3 people who had somehow ended up at the same table and decided to stay.